Let's go.
Okay, let's smash this intro. Welcome to MDC Talks. We are the Motion Dance Collective, and we're a dance on-screen production company specialised in the creation, presentation, and education of dance on film practice.
Woo woo.
I read the last bit, but I think we got away with it.
That's okay.
So this episode, we are going to talk about cinematic language.
Hey ho.
Yeah, let's do it. First question. What is your perceived concept of the word cinematic?
For me, it just speaks film. Obviously, as someone who's not a cameraman or as tech savvy as either of you, it just says film language, like the jargon you would use to create any kind of film or screen work. That's basically all I can say.
So the way of describing the
The
work
technical
of film.
words. Yeah, that's
Okay.
the
That's
way of
interesting.
describing the work in a technical sense. So the few words that I do know, about close-up and pan and all these things, that to me is cinematic language.
So
But are
more
you
sort of
meaning
behind the
just-
scenes
Yeah,
rather
I
than
think
on-screen
so.
visual.
Yes, for me, because to me, it's a technical thing.
Yeah, I guess like from many YouTube tutorials and delving into so many things, you always see these things that's like how to color cinematically, how to create more cinematic looking shots. And I guess there's become like a normalization of what cinema is. And obviously it's come from such a long line of different history and different things. But there's, I think when I think of cinema, I think of commercial cinema first, and then I'll go into underground cinema later, montage cinema, all these sort of crazy nuances of cinema that exist. So for me, it's so much broader now studying it than what it was for me before. But when I was first starting out, it was literally what Anna's saying,
Yeah.
a culmination of this side of language that I didn't know. I knew dance and choreographic language, but cinematic language was something that I hired people who knew what that was, and then they could execute that onto my films. But then I said I had to learn it. I had to learn the specifics of what filmic language was in general. And then cinematic just came from all those tutorials I saw online, just the whole idea of 4K and high digital quality photos and all this
I guess
certain
quality, yeah.
movements, certain like being able to do a dolly in while you're doing, all this gear that allowed for that to happen, the cinematographic gear, this idea of this really big high production value thing. I think that's what
Yeah.
it was for me.
Absolutely.
And then independent cinema was different, something that you could do,
on your iPhone.
guerrilla
or
filmmaking, or yeah, exactly.
On a GoPro
But
or...
to be,
Yeah, that's very true.
I don't know.
Quality is another thing that springs to mind from the word cinematic. Quality, larger scale, bigger budget.
Because so you kind of touched on something that I feel like on this topic I could just end up ranting for a long time. So
Yeah, no, but
so
start-
jump
start-
in.
start the
Right.
rant.
So you kind of touched on something that I thought would come up, and it's something that I have seen and heard a lot, and kind of feel is where cinematic can be a little kind of thrown at the wall sometimes.
Okay.
So this idea of like, oh, this shot is cinematic, oh, this feels cinematic, this kind of overuse and overgeneralization of the word
word.
cinematic, when no one really, I feel like it's used in places where it shouldn't be used.
Fair enough, yeah.
So for me, cinematic is about experience. It's about the experience of the audience. So for
Okay.
something to be cinematic, to say this movie or this documentary is really cinematic, that to me means that you're giving the audience an experience where they felt involved in whatever that was.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Because I think where people go wrong with cinematic is they think of individual shots as being cinematic, or particular shots being cinematic. You hear about sunsets a lot. Oh, yeah, this beautiful sunset was so cinematic. And it's like, well, but what about that shot was cinematic?
Tell me.
Because
Yeah.
I think where it becomes interchangeable and a bit generalized is people use the word cinematic in place of the word epic.
Okay, fair enough. That's a very good point.
So you can have an epic shot, you can have
Yeah.
an epic landscape, you could have an epic war scene.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that each of those things individually are cinematic. They can be
Together.
cinematic, but they are. But I feel like epic and cinematic are sometimes used
Would
interchangeably.
you say something then that literally taking from the word it adds to cinema is something that has that this epic that it can be viewed on this cinematic in a cinema context in a cinema viewing is that because wouldn't that be what's the actual definition of cinematic? Should we get it out right now?
Do you,
Let me get it out.
okay.
I'll have a quick look just out of interest
Yeah.
because does it have anything to do with the cinema?
So here's where I think it falls with cinema. Cinema is about stories, right? It's about
Yes.
telling stories. It's about narrative and emotion and plot and rise and fall and
Yeah.
all of those things, right? So it's really about story. And for me, for something to be cinematic, like I say, it needs to be an experience for the audience, and that can only come from story.
Yeah.
Right, so for me, for something to be described as cinematic, it has to have a few things in place, and I've kind of listed them here.
Yeah.
So there is a technical competency, so the stuff that you were on about,
Yeah.
there's like this gear that's involved, and certain movements, and certain lens choices, and
Yeah.
all of that stuff. So there's like a technical element, but that doesn't make something cinematic by itself, because people can have the best gear in the world and
And
create
still not.
basically junk.
Yeah.
And you know, you give Roger Deakins an iPhone and he'll probably make something really cinematic.
That's very true.
So there's technical and there's story, and they have to live together to create an experience for the audience. And in order to get there, to that point where you can recognize a great story and execute it
Wow.
with technical competency,
Yeah.
you have to go through what people talk about is like the 10,000 hours theory. Is like you have to have put in your 10,000 hours and failed
Yes.
over and over and over
Yeah.
again and learnt all of those lessons and come out the other side with
Proficient at it, yeah.
a certain experience of how to deliver something
Yes.
in the way that you envision it in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think it comes back to cinema.
Okay.
Is the people who are creating cinema for big screens that you go and you sit in a cinema to watch,
Yeah.
they've done that. They've done their 10,000 hours. They've
gone through
produced
that
loads
process.
of indie rubbish that never saw any light of day and that they're probably really embarrassed about. And they've come out the other side knowing how to pick a great story
Yeah.
and execute it, and knowing how to put a team together with technical competency to bring that story in an experience to the viewer.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is what cinematic is. It's both of those things joined together and delivered in a way that immerses the audience. And it's that immersion that I
That
would say is the
creates it.
cinematic language.
I love that. I love that explanation of it. Making those two things, I think you said, live together. It's such a beautiful way to picture it.
Well, can you be cinematic on your iPhone?
If you can create, if you can pick a story that can be told without compromise on an iPhone, then yes.
Because we've seen now some dance films that were shot on an iPhone. At Tea Dance, we saw
but
one
that's the
film.
thing is that the difference between projecting on a cinema screen or
Yeah.
literally watching on your phone. Can I make something that's
Oh, you
cinematic
mean
that
watching
is
it on
made
an
for
iPhone.
IGTV,
So-
for example, because
Yeah,
it's not
fair
cinema.
enough. I see what
It's
you're saying.
this
Yeah.
viewing. It's
So
this
here's
viewing.
where here's where I stand on this about
Yeah.
kind of the gear and the technical side of it is that as long as the experience is honest for the audience, it's still cinematic. So you could go and if you go and watch something, and this happens a lot to me. Okay, so I'll be watching something and I'll be really into it, and then all of a sudden there'll be something. There'll be like one shot that's like, oh, what did they do? Why did they do that? And all of a sudden, you're not thinking about the story anymore. You're thinking about
Why
why
that
did they make such a
happened.
weird choice of like this really low angle looking up the actress's nose, or
Yeah.
you know, why did they all of a sudden do a snap cut out of this sequence that didn't feel like it needed a snap cut? And those choices, as soon as you're drawn to thinking about why did they do that,
Yeah.
and you're not thinking about the story, that's the cinematic language going wrong.
Okay.
So so you can shoot on whatever you want and you can shoot however you want, as long as how you shot it doesn't draw attention to
the-
itself
to the
and away from the
technology.
story.
Yeah,
Fair.
that's a very interesting point, because it's like our job as filmmakers is to recreate reality and hide all of those things that give any light onto the fact that it's filmed, that the fact that this is a crew in the back, the fact that there's wires and cables and a lot of electricity being
Yeah.
used at the moment, the fact that there's a makeup girl over there, that these guys' faces aren't actually their faces in
Yeah.
the morning.
Like all of these things we manipulate constantly, and I think the part of the cinematic language is all the techniques that go into creating this reality.
A world.
A world.
Yeah.
Creating, not necessarily a reality, creating a world.
A world that people can believe in
Right,
fully
Yes.
for the duration of
Right.
that
And
film.
like you said, are immersed in it, because I feel like it's a really good point, because if instead of actually watching the story, enjoying the story, feeling part of the story or the world that you're watching, if you're instead thinking about why that shot happened, or why
Or that felt
or that
awkward.
cut, or
Yeah.
whatever it was, if you're thinking about that instead of the story and what you're experiencing, then that was wrong. Like, that was a mistake, right? Because
Well,
we shouldn't be, in my opinion, like James was saying, you shouldn't
Right.
be distracted by that. You should be able to just experience it and then be like, okay, this is what I got, this is what I took away, instead of, I don't know why that happened.
But that's the weird one as well, because
Or do you disagree?
No, because I do like films that do break beyond that on purpose, that make you go, oh, why would they do that? Like, and then you kind of have to. A lot of screen dances like that as well. It's kind of, you get these films where it's not. We've started doing that now, making
That's
films
true.
that highlight
Challenge something.
The Finding My Feet. It highlighted the tech we were using. You know, like that there
But
was
it
equipment there, or
It
you know, when
was
we were thinking about
structured like
showing
that
the-
to tell the story in the way that we wanted to tell it.
Right,
We
okay.
decided to shoot it in that way
Right.
because that was part of the story we were telling.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Behind
I would
the
argue
scenes,
the opposite. I would
yeah.
say
Yes,
that
it
the
is, it's a
language
story.
of that, we very specifically chose
Right,
the
right,
language of
right.
that film.
It was a
Okay, fair
decision instead of a,
Yeah.
oh,
it
it
was a
just
conscious
happened.
decision, yeah. Instead of
Yeah.
there was a lead accident, we just
Yeah,
chose to leave
yeah.
it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like,
You know, it's like
all those-
we decided to leave my voice in the interview.
Yeah.
Because we wanted it to be you talking to someone and me
And
feeding
not
back.
just talking to the
We could have really
lens.
easily said, I don't talk for this.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like those things, and it's like those little insights for people. We decided that was a decision about the way that we were going to show it.
It makes me think about, you remember, like, well, you will know, but all of those little, like, spoofs they make after film is made of all the mistakes they caught in the movie. So, like,
The blooper reels and stuff.
yeah, like, oh, not even bloopers, but, like, film-wise.
Just
so
like
those-
continuity
Oh,
errors.
Continuity
and-
errors.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
right.
like, you know, she was wearing a coat, but then when you come back, she's not wearing a coat. Did you notice it? Like,
Yeah.
stuff like that. It's it makes me think of that.
And there's people noticing that slip in the.
Oh, yeah, and then they put it all online, and there's, like, you know.
Okay, so let me move on from that particular question, if I can find my notes again. So, why should we consider cinematic language when preparing screen dance?
I think it, as someone who would be working with a cinematographer or a DOP who is not a camera experienced person, it helps in communication. It helps in the collaboration, simply because for me, if I'm going to speak about it from my perspective of the technical language, it really helps to just the cohesion of that work. Because if I can't communicate to you effectively what I want, you know, it's not going to translate necessarily. Or you're just going to have to take over, and that trust is going to have to come to the forefront as I'm giving this to you because I know that you're going to be able to deliver what I'm asking for. But I think, as with any collaboration, it really helps to have a crossover in the language, just as it does with dance practitioners and film practitioners. It's the same thing. Like, if you can't, having that language, that common language, changes the game, because you can, like, take it to another level where you maybe couldn't before. I've worked with composers in the past who used to be dancers, so when I talk about the Rond de Jambe, I want there to be a piano, whatever, you know, it helps, I think, you know, because with that connection in language, it just makes everything faster. It makes everything more effective. It makes it smoother, in my opinion. So for that reason, I'm like, okay, I need to learn what this is. I need to know what I'm talking about enough to be able to communicate to the DOP or the director or the, camera guy. I want you to pan up or
So,
whatever.
thinking about that sort of communication and that sort of preparation, when we shot together
Fractured Frames.
what in your head when you were choreographing that piece and thinking about how you wanted to portray that on film, what were you preparing? What were you thinking in terms of how much depth were you going into
Yeah.
that you were going to bring to me in
That's
terms
a
of the
really-
actual look?
I hear you. That's a really great question because this is probably the first time I've created a dance work specifically for film. Everything else I created became a film later, we worked on a film together, but I don't think I was thinking as much about the film side of it when we were
It was more
choreographing because it was more about the choreography and then how we were going to capture that. Whereas with Fractured Frames, from the beginning, I was thinking about what do I want to be shown on the camera right here. So, and because it's such a close-up, intimate piece for the most part, when I was choreographing, I was thinking about, I'm just gonna see her foot. I'm just gonna see her cheek. I'm just gonna see her arm. Things like that, which I've never experienced before as a choreographer because that was my first time doing something specifically for film. And so when I was in the studio with Alice, it was about, and I would tell her so, because I had an idea, this is just gonna be your legs. So telling her that I think as well helped because a lot of the initial stages of R&D were working through improv. So it was like a directed improvisation. So I was just speaking to her and letting her move, seeing what happened, and then I choreographed from those moments, And it was really interesting because I was using my phone in rehearsals to film her, and I was just being like, okay, I'm on your feet. Like the things
And
I've learned from
were you
working with the two of
experimenting
you.
with the phone in terms of not just what you were seeing in the frame, but how you were moving around her?
Yeah.
Were you playing
Yeah.
with, is this all going to be static and she's moving, or are we moving around her? Are we close into her? Are we far away
Yeah.
but zoomed?
No,
were you
I
experimenting
did.
with that?
I was moving around her. I was moving further away, closer in, like, different shots that we explored. And I said, I want a close up of this. I was experimenting with those ideas in rehearsal so that when it came to actually planning a shot list with you, I could say,
You'd already had
I already had an idea of what I wanted to see on the camera so that regardless of the choreography, maybe you only see this part of her body here. So absolutely, it shaped everything for that piece specifically. It changed everything because from the get-go, I was like, this is a dance film. How am I going to make it different? How am I going to lift the choreography?
Okay.
that.
Obviously that's a really good example, and you have a little bit of experience with working with Amari a
Learning
lot.
from
and
the two of you.
So you kind of know to plan for that. But on the flip side of that, I see
Yeah.
that quite often choreographers, particularly converting from stage to film, don't consider the language of film.
Yeah.
So they very much kind of think, okay, well, I've made the piece. Here's the choreography. This is
Now it's your
the
turn.
narrative of the piece that we've made, and then they kind of show up and just expect that it's put a camera in front of it, and
that's it.
there's our film. So so obviously there's this other layer of the language of that cinema brings to it and how we deliver that to the audience in order to allow them to immerse into this world that we're creating.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got so many. Right, so the joy of understanding cinema language and cinematic rules,
Oh, yeah.
in general. The joy of doing that is knowing that when
Give me some examples.
I'm talking rule of thirds, I'm talking the 180-degree rule, I'm talking simple
I don't know what
filmic
all
things
these are,
and
but
things that
you
we
can explain
don't
them
know.
in the-
But the joy of understanding them is that when you do break them or you want to break them, you can explain that to your filmmaker. You can do that with within the story. You can do that for a reason. And when I first started making films and filming myself, I didn't know about any of this stuff. I was just filming what felt nice and ended up going, oh, it is a rule of thirds. But now having that knowledge and going, right, put them in this golden pocket. I want this person to be here because I know that's an attractive place. I want to move right to left because I know that's uncomfortable for the audience because we're used to seeing left to right. So knowing these things and how just these rules and breaking them can change the way your audience feels.
It's power.
It changes exactly. You can now add that to your choreography. You can choreograph the camera specifically to adhere to the story that you want to tell. So the joy of learning cinema language to me is that, okay, I know now. I know why I'm doing this. I'm not just going, I want the dancers to be over there, and the cinematographer is going to me, you can't do that because of this.
Because
and
X,
I have
Y,
no
Z.
defense. I'm like, no, well, I just want to do it. Why can't you do it? It's like, no, I understand that there's a 180 rule here, but I want to break it because this piece is
And you have
about
a
domestic
reason for
abuse,
doing it,
and I
not
want it to
just-
be wrong.
yeah.
And I think, so
Yeah.
it's nice. For me, I had to learn the rules in order to explain why I wanted to break them if I wanted to break them.
Yeah.
Or if I wanted to do my own thing and and for a dancer it made sense that it's filmed in this way, but for a filmmaker it doesn't make sense because it's wrong. I can at least justify.
Yeah.
And I think as well that's part of the collaborative process as well, is maybe the choreographer doesn't need to learn all these rules.
No,
they just
not
need to
necessarily.
be aware that they are going to have to speak with the person who is producing the film, whether that's like a company or
Yeah.
an individual filmmaker, and
Yeah.
they're going to have to sit down and they're going to have to go through all the choreography that's going to be filmed, and they're going to have a conversation
About the shots.
how that relays onto the screen, and let
Yeah.
the cinematographer you are collaborating with or the production company you're collaborating with have a voice in
Absolutely.
that conversation, because they know all of these rules already, and they
Well,
know all
because
of these
exactly,
concepts,
and they-
so they can inform you, and you can have a discussion back and forth then about, is this the right choice for this film, or do you want to break it and make it purposely awkward or jarring or uncomfortable or
Yes.
super serene,
Well, because
and
that's,
how do we do that?
And that's a really good point, because I think obviously when we were shooting Fractured Frames, I had an idea of what I wanted, and I gave you a shot list before the shoot date, but we had one shoot date. So when we were there and it was happening, and we were action, I was still asking you questions, because you would ask me what I wanted, but then I would say, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Like, the joy of that collaboration is that you can give and take. And I was, using your experience, because I know that you know how to capture something. If I tell you I want it to feel like this, you know how to capture it on the camera to actually evoke that. Whereas I probably wouldn't know where to begin with technically how to do that.
Yeah, but then from that one experience, you've learned so much about
God,
that.
100,
And
yeah.
then the next time you work with a cinematographer, you can go, right, I actually want you to push in now.
Mm-hmm.
And you can start to use their language. I want you to push in just slowly, just enough. And
Yeah.
just to kind of go, and then you can blend your two. But the thing is that with screen dance, it's a breaking of both of them. It's like broken English. It's like you have to take the cinematic language, right, and the rules that exist there, and kind of break them up. Then you need to do the same with the dance language,
Yeah.
and break that apart too.
Just a little.
To kind of be able to do this and find this new language, because I know you're going to ask a question about it.
Yeah,
I'm very
I'm
sure.
just going to interject. I was going to interject it now,
yeah.
so you can
Segue.
carry on.
Interject now. Go on.
Okay,
Then I
so
can continue, but
you're already
yeah.
talking about it, but
Yeah.
let's just
Yeah.
fill everyone else in. So, does screen dance have a defined cinematic language of its own?
People are trying. People are trying. People are trying
think
to
it's
define.
happening.
This is where I think me and you are going to disagree.
Yeah.
I think
No, I don't know if. Yeah, I
Not
don't-
disagree, but,
yeah,
but
yeah.
Have different opinions.
There's a push and pull here.
Yeah, for sure. I think, as, again, someone that's not really read up on cinematic language or what that means or what that should be, I'm learning it through the medium of screen dance, so I guess it depends who you speak to, but for me, I'm learning it from the two of you, from our work together. So I don't know if that differs from general cinematic language, but I'm learning it as it relates to dance film.
But that's the thing. That's how you create. All art borrows from other art. So when film was starting, a lot of people were working with different types of. They were working with dancers and going, oh, I like the way they construct dance movement. Is there a way I can take some of that and put it into the way I make my films? And people were doing it. From like, even look at people who were making things with montage and all of these. They borrowed from aesthetics. They borrowed from painters. They borrowed from dancers. They borrowed from things. So I think that cinematic language has been given accents that have come from their experience of working with
Dance.
moving performers, especially dance. So that's why I think there definitely is a particular cinematic language that
dance on film?
for dance on film, for screen dance specifically, but it's just a particular accent. I don't know if necessarily the words change. Like people are thinking of all these different words, and the director and the what do you think, choreorector?
Yes, our
Yeah.
new
Like
word.
there's an ideology here of being able to find a common language with screen dance.
That's a good point.
Through breaking these things down. But screen dance is literally dance and moving image practitioners meeting together and forming a new country, a new accent, a new world. So the language, I feel, does
The
have to
same.
change a little bit, but it's not necessarily changing
A lot.
the words. It's just changing the accent of the language, if that makes sense.
I understand what you're trying to say, yeah.
It's like Scotland, England kind of thing.
So here's my kind of, it's not too different. It's a little aside on that. So as I said at the beginning, in my head, cinematic language is about immersion of the viewer. And with that as a basis for how we think about how I think about cinematic language is not a thing.
Okay.
So it's about achieving a goal. It's about servicing the narrative and creating a world that makes sense to that narrative and that an audience can be immersed in. So with that thought process, screen dance can't have its own language, because that would be like saying every screen dance is the same.
Very
We have
good
a
point.
language that can be applied to every screen dance film, and that isn't true. That isn't true for film in general,
Yeah.
because every story is different, which means each one needs a slightly different approach that's tailored to it to create the specific world of that film.
But
Yeah.
aren't those approaches what the language is? Because those approaches can be universal.
There are approaches that are genre specific.
Okay.
So it depends if you want to say that screen dance is a genre, but I would say that screen dance within screen dance has its own set of genres. So you could have a screen dance that is
Yeah, you
horror.
got- yeah,
you could have a
right.
screen dance that's comedy. You could have a screen dance
Yeah,
that's...
because I guess
Yeah.
we
You
know.
differentiate as well, saying video dance, dance on film, dance for camera, like all of these.
All the different kinds of screen dance.
So I would just say that it comes down to what is the feeling that each individual film, whether it be dance for screen or conceptual film or documentary or any of this,
Yeah.
what is the feeling it's trying to give, and did the language of the visuals support that and nurture the viewer's interpretation of that?
Yeah.
And if the answer is yes, then the language is correct. But I don't think any one language can be transferred
To
across any
everything.
genre.
Yeah.
There are traits, like comedies generally are shot 16:9, and they're generally higher key and brighter and bolder colors, and because they want it to feel a little bit more kind of normal and sitcom-y,
Yeah.
and that is kind of the language of comedy. But no two comedies will look exactly the same. They might follow some of them rules are the same. For
Yeah.
horror, generally, you get in much lower key images. It's
Yeah.
darker. It's probably more green in its tone. All of that stuff. So there are kind of traits that go across them, but no
Yeah.
two horrors look exactly the same. So
Yeah, no,
I don't think
absolutely.
I think it comes down to servicing the story.
what the two of you are saying sounds like almost the same thing.
Yeah,
in a
it's very-
different
it's
way.
very close.
It's very much sort of like overlapping slightly. It's like painting,
Well,
two
that's the thing,
different
yeah,
pictures with the same
you're
paintbrush.
you're definitely servicing the story, but it's different when you're servicing a story that's scripted and different when the story is dance, right? I feel there's this difference there between when you're servicing a different art form, because
For
genres is
sure,
one
but that's
thing,
why he's
but-
saying that the language, as long as it supports whatever the story is,
Right.
it works.
But then,
The
Like,
cinematic
yeah,
language.
I feel like, let's get away from calling it cinematic language, because obviously it's about the servicing the story, right? But filmic like language in terms of actual just cut, pan, move
Yeah.
by itself
The tech side.
doesn't service dance film
You don't think.
without having some form of dance language. It's like if someone just went in there and just filmed a dancer and had no knowledge of
The dance.
the dance itself, the style, or anything like that, or of the dancer and their personal attributes, it wouldn't service it as well. You would need the incorporation of the dancer and their feelings and what they want to get across and what the most important parts of that particular technique was in order for you to be able to make a collaboration that serviced that style in particular. So I don't think having one or the other by
I think
themselves
that just-
or as a binary works.
I think that just boils down to the collaboration between the artists.
Right.
Because if, we're talking about language, but at the end of the day, it boils down to what I was saying about being able to communicate effectively in that collaboration.
But if you were to collaborate with a Japanese artist, wouldn't you learn some Japanese as well, right? You want
Yeah,
to
for
do
sure.
that.
And that's why I was speaking to trying to learn some of cinema.
Yeah, so what my
So
question
trying to
is,
learn some
do you
film
think it's
language.
important that it happens the other way around? That
So that DOPs
filmmakers,
learn.
learn dance language. Do you feel it's necessary at all?
Yeah, but I think that happens naturally through the collaboration, doesn't it? If you film a documentary about the wing speed of sparrows, you're going to learn a little something about the wing speed of sparrows, even though
Yeah.
I'm just a cameraman filming the documentary.
But would you look at sparrows before you went out though? Like, would you do?
I think you have to, no?
Some
Would you
people don't. Some
but
people get
would
a
you
job and then they go out and
personally,
film it
James,
and then
would
they
you
set up.
educate
But
yourself?
again, now we're talking about
Personal
good
preference.
filmmakers versus
Yeah.
bad filmmakers.
Yeah.
You're always going to find people who don't want to put the work in.
Yeah.
But anyone on any kind of level producing competent work should be putting some research in
Beforehand, for sure.
Putting the time into the job that it needs.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, it comes down to did the audience forget about all of that technical crap and
just experience the
fact
story.
that there's a crew in the room, and did they just watch the story and feel whatever the emotion was that the story was meant to get across? That's either a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and it's
Totally.
kind of black and white in that sense. It's like it either
Yeah.
worked and people got it, or it didn't work and people didn't get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you're always going to have the little some people
In-betweens.
didn't quite,
Not
or
sure.
this
I
affected
disagree.
someone differently than that
Yeah.
person. But on a broad sense,
Yeah.
it's either it feels right or
One
it
or the
feels wrong.
other. Yeah, for sure.
But,
Perfect.
there's an amazing example of this that isn't screen dance, but me and my partner were watching a comedy once. We put this comedy on, and we got like 10 minutes into it, and we were both like, "Oh, I just can't get into this.
Yeah.
I just can't get into it." And normally it's me that says that because I'm very picky about. I'm looking for these things because of my interest in it. So I'm normally like, "Oh, this is bugging me." But she felt it as well, and we both kind of talked about it for a little while, and we just realised it was the wrong aspect ratio. They'd shot it in 21:9,
Really?
and comedy is. You do see comedies in 21:9, but it's not a genre
Traditionally,
choice
yeah.
traditionally. And something about the way it was lensed just didn't feel right. I didn't feel like I was experiencing the conversations they were having naturally. I felt like we'd been artificially put in the scene.
How interesting is
And we
that?
both felt it.
That's so cool. Yeah.
And it's just a small thing like that, just one choice, and something about the visual didn't serve the story correctly and didn't give the audience what they needed,
Yeah.
and it felt awkward.
But then that's why you need to learn about what in order to fix that, because you're saying it wasn't lensed right, and the thing
But
is
whose
that,
fault is that, though?
what?
That decision.
I mean, that decision would have been a conversation mostly with the DP and the director.
Right.
The DP would have suggested this is how we should lens it, and
And they would have agreed.
the
or
director
disagreed.
would have had some input
Say.
in it, but mostly the DP would have kind of the lead of the charge on that. And it's, it could just an honest mistake. Sometimes you get it wrong.
Yeah. Or sometimes that was your decision, but it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it can be
Right.
small things like that. Anyway, yeah, I think there's one more question. Let's just see if it's a quick one, or
my
we'll
goodness,
wrap
okay.
up there. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about here. So I was just going to say some good and bad choices for cinematographic
Yes.
things in films that we've made. I mean, I've kind of touched upon one that wasn't ours. The first thing that the only thing that really jumps to mind that bugs me about anything we've shot is the little focus pull to the flower and he's on down. That to me, I know people have said, "Oh, that's really cool," but for me, that pulls me out of what was happening.
story.
It was a clear mistake, a technical fault, and it pulls me away from the story of what you two were doing on screen. And you
Really?
go, oh, flower. Well, the flower was not part of the film. The flower was not part of the story. There was no narrative decision for why that flower should have pulled my focus.
Right.
So why did it pull my focus?
why
That
did
is
we
a
do it?
that is a
That is so interesting you
cinematographer
feel that way,
mistake.
because as a viewer and someone that wasn't involved with the shooting of the film, I don't feel that at all.
It was mad because it's like in those moments when you do have that autofocus, it's like the camera just becomes alive, boy. It's
and that's why auto is the devil.
it does that shit. But
Because that was not a choice that we made.
It wasn't,
It
it just
made the
happened.
choice
that
for me.
we couldn't really cut it because the continuity of the movement
That's why you kept it in.
had to stay in, and that's where
But it is a language mistake. It is an error in the language of that film.
yes, but
'Cause
it-
we didn't
but
choose
yeah,
for it to be there.
But in
Yeah.
the dance,
And it is
the
distracting.
dance language is
enough.
fine. So that's where the compromise had to happen. I had to go, well,
Yeah.
for the dance,
We have to keep it in.
we need to keep the cut, even if the cinematic language is off at the moment.
Yeah.
It actually is okay because the dance language is kind of counterbalancing it. So
Yeah.
it's like kind of like, okay, well, I can still hear the noise
That's
of
a
the
really
dance and everything.
interesting
So
point. Yeah.
No, and I
yeah,
think it's
right.
always going to work out that way round. If there's ever a decision between
it's that compromise,
performance
Or
or
the way it's shot.
visual,
Yeah.
performance should always
always
win.
win, right?
But
Yeah.
we have to be aware. But this is why film sets get so expensive, because you need control over everything.
Yeah.
So really, we should have had an extra person on set with us pulling focus.
Right, yeah,
no
yeah.
autofocus.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we could get around that thing, no problem. But then you're talking more
add
crew,
one
more
more.
money.
all that. Yeah,
One
yeah.
more person to that
One
already
more
very
person.
large
Yeah.
cast
And
slash.
this is
crew.
why things get so expensive, because you need control over everything
Yeah.
in order to
To make that
execute the visual
right.
language that you
right,
want.
Right.
So anyway, that was just from my point of view. That's a really clear example of
Yeah, that's a great
language
example.
kind of being blurred
Yes.
in something.
Absolutely. I love
Anything else that jumps out at you two from stuff that we've shot or stuff that you've seen, a good or bad?
Not that I can think of.
Yeah, all our work has been perfect.
No, not that. I think there's just been more opportunity.
I mean, there's been moments where
There's been more opportunity to cut it out or to not use it when there were mistakes made. You know what I mean? Because we did multiple takes, or we tried something else, and then the second take was so much better because it worked with whatever we were working on.
yeah, I can just think of moments where I've
obviously-
done it on purpose, where I've tried to. We made a piece called In Angst, which is still needing to be finished
In
at the moment.
post.
But what we did was that we cut. The director would say cut, and you'd hear him say cut, which was me, and then the director would go and give notes to the dancer. And because the piece was called In Angst, the dancer was just anxious, like every time I went to go and give a note, she was like this. So we had a moment where we cut everything,
kept
cut the
rolling
music,
that.
kept rolling, and I went towards her trying to give her notes, but then she goes like into a corner. Then we cut back to a close-up of her in the corner and continued the dance piece. And so that was a moment that I purposefully wanted to show that break, but I also wanted to keep her in character.
What happens after cut?
What happens after cut, yeah, and then how the dancer feels, that kind of like, oh, fuck, I'm just about to get notes, I've just like laid my heart out, now I've got to get notes.
Now I gotta do it again.
That
Yeah.
anxiety of making dance film, I guess, was something I wanted to portray. But again, I did that on purpose. It wasn't kind of like,
Yeah,
oh,
I mean that
It
was
was
part of the
decision.
that was
language.
part of it.
That
So,
was
but
a
I'm
clear-
also still not sure whether that moment works. We were, whether
was
we
an
should take it out, keep it in.
experiment. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's one of those ones that we played with, but we wasn't sure. But I wanted to delve into that. But yeah, as in terms of like whether we felt the story didn't fit on certain films, it's such an important part for me that I've let that language suffer in service of the performance. And that we've talked about this, right? Because I love the content and I love the story, and I make sure that's the most important part for me. And James loves light. He loves, he loves cinema. but that's the thing is that we yin and yang and make sure that
Balance.
That's the advantage of having a team on it, right?
Right,
Because
that's the
every
advantage of
person
having
on
a
your
team.
team should be really passionate about the part of the film that they're making.
Right.
Yeah,
And hopefully that
significant.
raises the bar for the whole production, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So in that sense, I guess sometimes the cinematic language has suffered, but it didn't make the story weaker. It was
Because we found
just,
a different way to elevate it.
But that's
Yeah, I
but that's
guess
the
so.
thing.
It's just small mistakes that you wouldn't notice because the performance is so
I
good.
think you can have. I think maybe this is where I struggle with a lot of dance film is that you can There can be incredible story, there can be incredible concept, there can be incredible movement. And if the consideration is not given to how that is delivered to the audience, which in this particular genre is film, that is the delivery format. If there is no consideration given to the cinematographic language, then how well is that amazing choreography, is that amazing story, is that amazing dancer given to the viewer?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where screen dance can sometimes be lacking, just because of the lack of injection of information from the film side.
Right. Agreed. 100% agreed.
You know, there's this incredible saying that I stumbled across that was just taste over talent.
Yeah.
And it's something that
You have it on your
I've
desktop.
really, I have it on my desktop. It's something I've really latched onto. Is like, people can have incredible taste, and until they develop the talent to execute what they consider great taste, their work can never live up to that great taste. So just because someone's work doesn't come across as being great doesn't mean they don't have good taste and they aren't capable of making good stuff.
Yeah.
They just need to go through their 10,000 hours of failure to get their technical standpoint up.
Yeah.
Then they can execute their great taste.
So we're going to keep working on our 10,000 hours, guys.
Oh, I'm still working on my 10,000 hours.
And
I'm
we're
about
gonna get
1,000
there.
in.
We're going to get there.
All right, should we leave it there?
I think
Yeah.
that's a beautiful place to leave.
Man,
It
that
is.
is.
All this taste is making me hungry.
We're gonna go and finish the rest of our 9,000 hours of failure.
Yes.
Thank you for watching. Thank you to everyone for being here and talking about cinematic language, and we'll see you in the next one.
Peace out.